Hare Krishna. Hallelujah. Praise God. Welcome back, everyone. This is our 30th Bhagavad Gita live stream. We have now made it to one of my favorite verses. I call it the Guru verse, which is 434 in the Gita. So here's our plan for today. I'm going to do just this verse, and hopefully don't take too much longer than 30 minutes. Although if we do go more, that's good, because this is a great verse. So I'm going to read the verse. Then I'm going to read my notes on the verse, which I took months ago. And then I'll read the whole purport by Prabhupada. And then I'll share at least one story from my own life with my own gurus, plural, and what that means to me. Once again, I'm just doing the invocation mantra for the Bhagavad Gita as it is, as far as just what I've been able to memorize. And also today marks the first live stream where we'll be joined by the literal translation from my Diksha Guru, H.D. Goswami. Fantastic. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, 434. Quote, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Unquote. Would have been nice if I started with the Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, but it doesn't actually say that in this verse, although that is the truth. Sri Bhagavan did Uvacha this verse. All right, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to read the word-for-word translation, which is just above, the colloquial translation. Oh, man, that's really hard to... There it is. For those of you who don't know the technical terms here, this is one reason I instantly fell in love with the Gita, because it's so rare to find an academic text which translates so systematically. So every verse in Prabhupada's Gita, it starts with the original Sanskrit verse in Devanagari, then the Sanskrit transliteration, that means just how to pronounce the Sanskrit using Roman letters, then the word-for-word English translation, and then the colloquial English translation. So there's actually two translations, one transliteration, and then the actual verse in Sanskrit in its pure form. Well, pure enough, because it's possible Devanagari did not exist 5,000 years ago. I'm not sure about that. I'm just not sure about that. So let's read the word for word, which will not make sense because it's word for word. It does not concern grammar at all. It's just this word means exactly this in English, and then this Sanskrit word means literally exactly this in English, like that. I'll read just the English first. That knowledge of different sacrifices, try to understand by approaching a spiritual master, by submissive inquiries, by the rendering of service. Initiate unto you knowledge, the self-realized, truth, the seers. Actually, most of it it flowed pretty nicely, actually, just until the very end. And that's why we need a colloquial translation instead of just this word for word, which uses Sanskrit grammar, which is very different from English grammar. You'll notice the same in Japanese. If you do a literal translation in Japanese, it will make no sense in English because their order of subject and verb is totally opposite ours. It just won't make sense if you do a literal translation. Might be in Japan soon teaching English. We'll see. The Sanskrit sounds like this. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadeksyanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva darshinaha. All right, next we will go to H.D. Goswami's literal translation of the verse. And so one of the main benefits of having this book here is, so if you want just what is the Sanskrit like by itself as a Sanskrit reader, while if you can't speak or read Sanskrit, but you want to know what that would sound like, that's what this book is all about. And so as I read this, try to compare it with Prabhupada's word-for-word translation. This is in between, basically. There's the word-for-word translation. You could also call it the literal translation. So in Prabhupada's Gita, there's, once again, the Sanskrit verse, the transliteration, the literal translation, and then the colloquial translation. So you can compare the literal translation from Prabhupada with this literal translation from H.D. Goswami, which should be in between Prabhupada's literal translation, which is by design illegible, incomprehensible most of the time, with the colloquial translation, which is far easier to understand than the literal translation of H.D. Goswami. So here is 434, H.D. Goswami's literal translation. Learn this by submission, full inquiry, and service. Knowers will teach you knowledge, for they have seen the truth. That's it. Notice how he got all the important main word. It's super concise. It's a little staggering how concise that was. But submission, inquiry, service, knowers, and knowledge. And then it's also important to note in the book here, truth is with a capital T. That's definitely significant. I'll take as many different verses and purports that I can get my hands on. That's how I do this stuff. Well, yeah, so let's just read my notes. I'm just going to read through it as fast as I can because we're going to read the whole purport also. Okay, so there are 2 Sanskrit words I wrote down that I mostly just write these down because they sound nice, or I like to practice them more, bring them into my vocabulary. So one is pranipatina, which means approach a guru. It's just a great, useful word. And pariprashnena, inquire submissively. And I wrote, this is the guru verse, and for me, this means for life in general, not just religious life. Although, as we'll read later in Srila Prabhupada's purport, he's, of course, speaking almost entirely about spiritual masters and spiritual and religious life. But he does actually hint at how this can be good life advice, just how to be a good student. This is also, you could call the student verse or the disciple verse, especially the purport, because it tells you exactly how to be a good disciple. And what a bad disciple looks like is explicitly stated by Srila Prabhupada. So this is the guru verse, but it's also the disciple verse. And this is how I take notes. I abbreviate. So I said, in purport, SP, Srila Prabhupada says, Lord is OG master. That's very American, slang. OG is like original gangster, but I just use it as abbreviation to mean original, like the original one. OG is just a very quick abbreviation to say that. And right now I'm thinking to myself, man, if only I was fluent in Chinese, I wouldn't be dirtied by all the American slang that I've been grown up with. But we have to deal with what we have. And also my notes said, more importantly, no one can be bona fide master by his own bona fide spiritual master by his own manufacturing. We'll get to that later. So Prabhupada quotes the Bhagavatam, and he doesn't say where, but it's an important note where this Sanskrit verse, I'll read it later, in the Bhagavatam says, the path of religion is directly enunciated by the Lord. That's one of many reasons why a bona fide spiritual master does not just make it up by himself. One is he just doesn't need to. You may want to, but he doesn't need to because the Lord has himself spoken, whether it's the Pentateuch and the Ten Commandments in stone of Moses, or the Bhagavad Gita, or the Quran, or the Gospel. Like, the Lord comes down, he descends, avatar, and he just tells us what is what to do, what not to do. He simply explicitly tells us. So spiritual master means, basically it means a perfect disciple. It means someone who won't make up a new commandment. He'll tell you the same commandments you already know from your Shastra, from your scriptures. And when he gives you a purport, it's a valid purport that can help you understand, not because he's a master, but because he's the perfect disciple who is simply just following the same thing from the Lord that he wants you to follow. Of course, we should treat him as a master. But how does he become a master? By being the perfect disciple. Prabhupada explicitly says, quote, such a spiritual master should be accepted in full surrender, and one should serve the spiritual master like a menial servant without false prestige. And so the key word there is menial. So I have a tab of the dictionary open up here, which comes from the old French word meni, which means household. So basically, a menial servant means a house slave. That word is deliberately meant to make you feel that it's talking about someone who is humble, lowly, and sometimes degrading, servile, submissive. A servile person or a domestic servant. Those are the noun forms it mentions. Now, this is, I like how menial comes from household, because what do you get when you're a household servant? Well, you get a house. You get shelter of a house. So while in one sense, a menial servant of a blacksmith may be the same as a menial servant of the king of a nation, in one sense, they're both menial servants. They're just house slaves in one sense. But in another sense, when you're the house slave of a king, you get to live in the palace. You get to have the best meals, or at least maybe not as good as what the king is eating, but even his morsels, his remnants are still very good compared to many other people are working so hard and paying their own money for, and they have to choose this or that. But if you commit to the house, the church, the palace, whatever, and you just serve it humbly, you get the shelter of that house. Of course, it's hard to be that menial for especially us rebellious Westerner types, but there is a bright side. The positive side is we get the shelter of the house. And the house of Prabhupada, which is ISKCON, is a glorious, opulent, divine house. And I would also say that about the Catholic Church and all the Muslims and Buddhists and all the other faiths as well. The corruption notwithstanding. I don't know if I use notwithstanding correctly, but yeah, there's all that corruption and stuff, and that's bad. But that's the cost of doing business. It's really that simple. If you want to be divine Superman in this lowly material, three-dimensional planet Earth, Kali Yuga reality, you're going to get corruption. There's no way around it. So what do? You say, oh, it's too much. I can't handle it. I give up, which is quite common, even for sincere and great devotees. At least going through that phase might actually be an essential step along the path. I know it's a step I've taken. I've gone back and forth about it, and I still do this whole time. I don't have anything against ISKCON, but as long as I have the choice between ISKCON America or ISKCON China or ISKCON Brazil, I'm obviously going to choose the one that's more suited to my personality, where I can be of more service. So regardless of whatever nasty things I might say about one particular instance of ISKCON is international. I have not forgotten that. And once again, it's the same with the Catholic Church. Doesn't matter how many child molesters from the Vatican or whatever you can mention. I don't live there. I don't care, bro. Unless it's actually where I'm living and directly affecting me or my people, I don't care, because I'm a grown-up. Hari Bol. Almost done with the notes here. So we just talked about being a menial servant without false prestige. Now, this may seem fanatical, because for mundane masters, it is. Not just in America, but even in China. If you, want to learn basketball, if you say, I want a basketball master, and then, on your first meeting, you do a full koto, a full dandavat, and you, please, master, I am forever in your service, my lord. If that's fanatical, it's just not appropriate for a master of something mundane to be fully menial, ultimate submission, humbly. I mean, but then again, it's not really bad. Too much humility is still kind of a good thing, especially spiritually. So even if you really want to be good at basketball, but you're a devotee and you're still at some, you still have this thing inside of yourself where, well, my main thing is still submitting to God, and you're come across as fanatical by being too submissive to some mundane person or situation, that's still fine. That's still kind of, I don't want to say it's good, but it's really not that bad. You can get in much worse trouble for much other things. So it's not that big of a deal. But anyway, that mundane learning, we're all interested in some mundane learning, how to get financial freedom. There's tons of masters online now that say, oh, here's your side hustle, passive income, I'll teach you how to do this. You can benefit a lot from one of these guys. And when you do acquire, passive income and you get financial freedom, well, you have more time to devote yourself to the Lord. So as long as you do it with ethical means, we don't care. Us devotees, we don't care. More power to you. But now what I'm writing here is that we can learn anything mundane. You can learn yourself. So that's why it's fanatical to be way too humble and menial for a mundane teacher or coach or master, because you don't need some bona fide parampara disciplic succession sort of thing for just how to play basketball. You can just go on YouTube and watch a 10-minute video and you get the basics. You can self-teach just about anything you want to learn. The best example of that is myself, actually. Of all the people I've met, I'm one of the most self-taught, eclectic people that I know. So many different things. But what am I actually proud of? The things that I'm most proud of, where I've succeeded the most? Oh, it's because I was a good student. It's because I had a great teacher, and I was very humble to that great teacher, and I became their teacher's pet, and I was able to get that mercy from them without my own manufacturing. That's what actually makes my life happy and blissful and peaceful, is not my own manufacturing. which is why I have no problem being all proud talking about the mundane things, because I just know they don't matter. So it's just interesting stuff that doesn't matter. That's why I sometimes say really arrogant, prideful things and sometimes don't. I just don't care. Anyway, the attitude of submission and inquiry must be there on some level, even for mundane things. You must have some level, some degree of submission and inquiry, or else you're not actually a student. And therefore, I wrote, Pariprashnena is therefore the dharma of the learner. So even though, you don't have to go this far being totally menial for learning how to speak Japanese or play basketball or whatever, there has to be some inquiry, some submission, or else you're not a student. Take, for instance, the young disciple who makes a show of humility and says, "Oh, yes, master. Yes. Oh, what you've said is so interesting. I'll do what you say." And then as soon as the master goes to the next room, he goes, "Yeah, we'll see, bro. I'll Google it myself first. Then I'll see what's what." That's not a student. That's a monkey. That's barbaric behavior. If in the back of your head you're constantly thinking, "Well, I know what's best, and I'm just playing the role of the student, but what I actually accept as truth or not is only up to me, bro." You're not a student. You're a monkey. Harsh words by design. It's also important to note that, and this is exactly what I've just talked about basically, Prabhupada explicitly states that blind followers and absurd inquiries are condemned. And with that, we will read Srila Prabhupada's purport. The path of spiritual realization is undoubtedly difficult. The Lord therefore advises us to approach a bona fide spiritual master in the line of disciplic succession from the Lord himself. No one can be a bona fide spiritual master without following this principle of disciplic succession. The Lord is the original spiritual master. Hashtag OG. Sorry. And a person in the disciplic succession can convey the message of the Lord as it is to his disciple. No one can be spiritually realized by manufacturing his own process, as is the fashion of the foolish pretenders. The Bhagavatam says, Dharmam hi sakshad bhagavat pranitam. The path of religion is directly enunciated by the Lord. Therefore, mental speculation or dry arguments cannot help one progress in spiritual life. Important caveat: if you're studying philosophy and everything else that's mundane, mental speculation and dry arguments can help. But for, once again, we're reading the words of Bhaktivedanta Swami, the master of Bhaktivedanta, which is loving devotional service to the Lord according to the words of the Lord. That's literally what Bhaktivedanta means, according to Srila Prabhupada. So it's a very high path. So if you're on this topmost spiritual path, you have to be a topmost disciple, which means in this context, mental speculation and dry arguments are not going to help. Okay, continuing on. One has to approach a bona fide spiritual master to receive the knowledge. Keyword receive. Which is different from get. It's different from entitled. Like our education system kind of conditions us to feel that we're entitled, like we graduate. If your grade is like this much or higher, you just graduate. Doesn't matter what your name is. They just call you up to the thing. They give you the thing and you're done. Goodbye. Great job. See you later. That's different from receiving knowledge from a bona fide spiritual master. That may take you 2 weeks, may take you 10 years, may take you 100 lifetimes. There's no grading system. There's no, you do this, then there's no jumping hoops blindly. There are hoops you'll have to jump through, but those are your hoops that are there on your path that are only you can walk through, that only a bona fide spiritual master who's your spiritual master. It's not just any spirit, it's your, based on your personality and your synchronicity and so on. That spiritual master will tell you the hoops you need to go through, and as how you go through them and how fast you go through them, those are all variable. But whether you receive it or not is not really up to you, and it's not up to the system either. It's not up to the institution. It's up to only the spiritual master and whatever mercy and grace that is funneled through him from above. So it's about reception. You can only receive when you're humble. When you're in a place where you can only receive, then you have to be an empty cup. You have to be able to receive it. If you're a full cup, you can't receive it. So you have to be an empty cup. So there has to be space for you to receive the knowledge. And you have to put the cup near the master so he can pour into your cup. If you have a perfectly empty cup, but it's 10 light years away, it's not going to work. If you're, really humble and you do all the polite etiquette things perfectly, here, master, I'm not ready to receive the great knowledge. But the master looks at the cup and it's full and overflowing to the top. You can't pour it in. It's a waste. He'd rather pour it somewhere else. Analogies are quite effective sometimes. Moving on. Such a spiritual master should be accepted in full surrender, and one should serve the spiritual master like a menial servant without false prestige. Satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master is the secret of advancement in spiritual life. One more time. Satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master is the secret of advancement in spiritual life. Once again, I'm going to show you how this is not just about spiritual life. It's also true for mundane life as well. And I'll give you some examples later. But when you have a teacher that you're studying with and you satisfy them, meaning you don't just do the bare minimum, but you follow the instructions of the teacher and you do it in a way that satisfies the teacher. This is really the key to my success. So I have so many examples of this from so many different teachers where I've just personally satisfied them, where they go, wow, like this guy, he understood all the instructions better than the other students. He followed the instructions really well. And he did it with personality and style. Wow, I love this guy. My life is full of stuff, of experiences like that. And you only need, when I say full of, I mean for each field that you study, like brewing and winemaking, which I did for some time, you only need 1 or 2 moments like that with a teacher and they're yours. You only need to do it like once or twice, and then they're yours and you are theirs as well. Much like falling in love in a romantic relationship. If a man meets a woman on the street, I was going to say girl, because anyway, moving on, but let's just keep it, it's complicated in English because when she's 17 years old and she's really lovely, she's technically a girl, but she's kind of a woman. It's just complicated, right? But anyway, the man should definitely be a man. So when a man, let's do it Aristotelian style. When a medium-aged man meets a young woman, that's ideal, 35 and 18, according to Aristotle. When they meet, and then the man in the first date, in the first moment, does everything perfectly, and it's a perfect kiss and a perfect whatever, and then they meet the parents. If just the first moments are perfect, what you get from that is like a very peaceful, happy, blissful next year, 2 years, 3 years. You get to really cruise on autopilot after that. If you really do the first things perfectly to the satisfaction of her parents, yourself, and God, and your parents, and if everyone is satisfied by your work, by your karma, what do you get? You get the good fruit of good karma. It's that simple. Moving on. Inquiries and submission constitute the proper combination for spiritual understanding. Unless there is submission and service, inquiries from the learned spiritual master will not be effective. One must be able to pass the test of the spiritual master, and when he sees the genuine desire of the disciple, keyword genuine, he automatically blesses the disciple with genuine spiritual understanding. I wish you could see it on the page. Genuine and genuine are stacked right on top of each other. So not only is that word showing up twice in the same sentence, but Krishna has designed this so that you can, when you look at this page from a distance, it's just genuine, genuine. Very important to be genuine. In this verse, both blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. So many examples in ISKCON of blind following and absurd inquiries. I can give you one example now. We're already at 32 minutes. But, it's such a good example. I mean, I remember it so clearly, so I have to do it. The first ISKCON I ever visited was in Mayapur. And I knew nothing about ISKCON at the time. I knew the Gita very well, but I didn't know japa. I didn't know like where the dhoti. I didn't know like ISKCON as such. But I joined a few classes, and there was this one class where the master talked a bit about planets and the upper worldly planets, and it's just like scientific nerdy stuff like that, like how they rotate around each other, or like in this dimension, like basically stuff that is not relevant for a sincere disciple, a sincere beginning disciple who doesn't even know Atma realization or like Raja Vidya, like they're still working on basic stuff like that, which is most of us, even in Mayapur. I shouldn't say even in Mayapur, but it is true for many people that they haven't actually had a basic level of realization of like chapter 2 stuff in the Bhagavad Gita. And so this question time at the end, and this other brahmachari guy there asks, "Oh, well, you talked about the fifth planet of Zohar," and see, I can't even remember because for me it's just irrelevant, so I don't put that stuff in my brain. But he said, "Well, what if the fourth dimension of the upper planetary system, and what would happen about that?" And you could tell that he was trying to like trick the Swami into like not so much trying to trick him, but there's prestige, there's false prestige in that question, in that context, by a young brahmachari asking a Swami and lecturing in Mayapur about what's seemingly advanced. Ooh, part of it is like, oh, let's see how advanced you are, Swami. And then the other part of it is like, oh, look, let's see how advanced I am for asking that question. Ooh. And then, well, the Swami had, a polite response, which was, oh, well, this thing's in these planets. He gave a general response. So there was a very tactful response that showed how, well, actually, before you get to all these details, just remember, well, there's 3 worlds, there's 4 different systems, and something like that. I personally think because there's so many disciples and students who are asking these absurd inquiries, who are blind following, because this is actually a systemic and chronic problem within ISKCON, that a better Swami would respond by saying, with like harshness by saying something to the effect of, why does that matter? What? That's kind of a stupid question, don't you think? How is that relevant? And then see how they respond. Because there are some, even when a master is harsh with the disciple, there's still some disciples who will still say, well, I think it's important we follow the Shastra, don't you? And when that comes, then be more harsh until they know their place. This is how we do it in China, in Japan. It works really well. Obviously, you have to use clean language. Don't use expletives. But the truth is the truth. And there's a definitive truth. There's no amount of head bobbing where you can just get yes, no, maybe so. No, there is yes and there is no. Spiritual science, that's what it means. 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 does not equal 3, nor does it equal 0. 1 + 1 = 2. Spiritual science should have the same level of mathematical precision, which means when a master hears an absurd inquiry from a disciple, that master should basically just say, sorry, that's an absurd inquiry. I'm not going to answer it. It doesn't actually have to be harsh at all. It can be as simple as that. A master can simply quote this verse and Prabhupada's purport and say, oh, by the way, a disciple should not be blindly following or asking absurd inquiries. And what you've asked me is an absurd inquiry. Next. That's the truth. That's the cold, hard truth. How you express that is what we call rhetoric. And some swamis, of course, are far better than others at rhetoric, just like some people are better than others. Most of us have not studied rhetoric, and most of us do not have the natural charisma or gift for it. So that's fine. But if you don't have the cold, hard truth about it, and you're not able to at least just say the cold, hard truth, which is what Prabhupada does, this is what acharya means in our tradition, then what are you doing exactly? Moving on. One should not only hear submissively from the spiritual master, but one must also get a clear understanding from him in submission and service and inquiries. Clear understanding. Keyword is clear. So when the master says something that sounds really profound, it's, it's nice to be like, whoa, Hare Krishna. Yeah. But if you don't actually understand it, you have to say that. You have to say, like, oh, can you please elaborate? I'm sorry, I don't quite get it. As long as you're sincere and humble, the master will be so happy to explain it to you. You must have a clear understanding. Once again, spiritual science, not spiritual fanaticism, spiritual science. A bona fide spiritual master is by nature very kind toward the disciple. Therefore, when the student is submissive and always ready to render service, the reciprocation of knowledge and inquiries becomes perfect. Perfection. That's the last word in this purport, is perfect, and that couldn't be more perfect. That's exactly what we're talking about here. This one verse, if you follow this one perfect verse perfectly, you're done. You graduated. You transcended. You did everything. You went from zero to hero. You made it. You made it. That's all it takes. This one verse, meditate on it, repeat it, practice it, do it over and over again. Just do it perfectly once, and your whole life will change. Now, I'll give you hopefully a few examples. I have a bunch, but I'll give you a few. The best one to start would probably be judo, which is a Japanese martial art. And that's the best example because Eastern martial arts are pretty similar to religion and spiritual mastery. It's a very similar tradition, a similar culture where there's a lot of humility involved. It's not it's not as mundane as learning how to draw or learning how to speak a language or learning basketball or something. It's way less mundane than that. Um, so I studied judo in America, first in Vermont, and there was, it's just my nature to find the best master, and eventually I found him, and he first did a guest lecture at our combat fitness gym, which is mostly like college kids and like um kind of meathead types. I don't mean that in a bad way, but fitness freaks, and they're not in the esoteric stuff at all. They just want to kick ass and yeah, man, martial arts, yeah, bro. Um, but we had judo classes there, and so I think he did one guest lecture there, and I mean, he's called O Sensei, which means the sensei of senseis, because he is the oldest man and he has the highest ranking of all the black belts. And I could tell right away just by how he walked, he was my man. And so throughout that class, my first time meeting him, I just made sure to let him know with subtle cues that I meant business as a student. And this is really transcendental, right? Because how do you, as a menial servant, take on that kind of confidence? It's paradoxical. But when you're able to do it, you get advancement very quickly. And so, yeah, I was just able to show him that I was a good student, which meant just following his instructions, not virtue signaling, but just doing the task, just being good at the task. And I also, I spoke to him privately after the class. So nice to meet you. I just glorified him. I didn't do. Also remember, this is America, so even if you're doing religion in America, there's a level of humility that you might find in India or Japan that is sometimes strange here. So there was no dandavas, there was no kneeling or anything like that. I nodded my head to him for sure. I gave him a deep nod, and then the rest was just excitement. I wanted to show him, I'm excited to meet you. It was a great class. I want to learn more. I wanted to show him just how hungry I am to learn more and associate with him more. And he instantly reciprocated. And, from then on, he would pay attention to me, So after showing a technique, he would often just come to me specifically. He said, you can practice with me, And so this went on for weeks and months. And then eventually at one point, this was actually this was at the combat fitness gym again. So it was I think the second time he did a guest class there. And he said, all right, well, we're going to focus on basics today. And that's another way you can pick out a top level master, is they can do a whole one day, a full 20-hour plus whatever class on the most basic first principles with a big smile on their face. They're happy. And then likewise, a low level master, someone who just got their black belt, they're happy to show off. Oh, well, about the very advanced, sophisticated details of the upper planetary systems that, the 13th canto. Oh, yes. Oh, it has not been published because only I know about it and not you. There are masters like that who are bona fide masters, but, they're just low level. They just, they were just recently graduated and they're just, a little up in the air a little bit, up in the head a little bit. That's fine. But the top level masters are not like this. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, is a great example. He would stop when they were doing like, what's it called? Sankirtan, Harinam out in the city. And then like if people like weren't actually chanting, he would stop everything and just make sure a little kid could just say the words correctly and then continue on. Like that's actually where his consciousness is for these top level masters, is first principles foundation, because they know, just as I'm telling you with this story, when you get that perfect foundation, perfect reciprocation for master and student, it is so natural and effortless to just go whoosh, straight to the top. So back to O Sensei in judo. So at one point, during that set, it was a big class, big audience, and so we're doing a first principles class on ukeme, which means break falling and forward rolling. So we showed how to do a forward roll, and then he said, "Okay, now I want my best student to demonstrate the best way how to do this. So come on, Alex, you're my man." And he chose me, and I did, a few forward rolls in front of the whole class, which is other black belts, white belts, green belts, the whole class. He chose me. Why? Because of, to be honest, the very, very subtle things, not anything big, but just how I would nod to him, how I would smile when talking to him and show him that I'm not, it's not blind follow. No, I'm actually following you. It's a really subtle thing. But when you're sincere and you're talking with someone who's more sincere than you, when you're a beginner and you're talking to someone who's advanced, if you're just sincere, if you're simply sincere, they pick up on it. And that's rare. It's really rare to get a sincere disciple these days. It's very rare. So that also means it's very quick to get in their good graces. Okay, one more example. So I learned how to brew beer and make wine in college, about the same time I was learning judo. And most guys, this is typically a masculine activity, brewing beer. It does require heavy lifting and chemical knowledge, scientific knowledge. So it is, appropriate more for men than women typically. But coincidentally, one of the best brewers and winemakers in the state of Vermont is also the business owner of the homebrew supply store, the only homebrew supply store in the whole state. And she's a woman, and she's very womanly. She's very feminine, very small, very chatty lady, kind of weird hair, just very womanly, very feminine, catty woman. And a lot of times she's the only person in the store. And, I went in there, I tried Googling it, like how to brew beer. And I see most of the websites are just like most of the men who brew beer. They're like science and this is chemical fermentation, blah. And I just got a headache. I was like, ew, this isn't what I want to do. I want to do art. I want to make something that tastes good. That's my level of consciousness and desire. So I went in, and after talking with her, she confirmed my suspicion, and she was doing this her whole life exactly how I wanted to do it, which is as art, not as science, but as art. And she said right away, this is just like cooking food. If you can cook a meal, you can cook a beer. It's the same thing. You get a sense for the ingredients, how they smell, how they will interact with each other, and then the temperature of the fire and how it's going to progress along. It's the same thing as that. You just get a sense for it. But anyway, I don't want to talk about brewing so much. I want to talk about 434, the Guru verse, right? So first of all, you have to know who is a bona fide teacher or master and who is not. I knew right away she was bona fide, in part because of her gender. Just because she was a woman in a field dominated by men, I knew one of only two things. Either she sucks and, they're just taking pity on her by letting her, have a business and whatever, or she's that good that there's nothing these guys can do about it because her work is that much superior than theirs, which is true. I knew it right away because when you walk into the homebrew supply store in Winooski, Vermont, and you look at the ceiling, 4 corners of the ceiling you can't even see the paint on the ceiling because it's covered with blue ribbons of first place prizes that she has won for her creations in beer, cider, and wine, maybe distilled things too. And I would just ask her a question like, what do so do you like beer or cider? Oh, I like beer. Like she, there's something in her that just gets activated. And I could tell right away this was her excitement. She was really good at it. And so I submitted to her in my heart right away. As soon as I knew she was the real deal, I submitted in my heart right away, just as I submitted to O Sensei right away. But how you express that in the manifest world can be different. When we're American white people, you know, the level of submission that I'm talking about that has worked so successfully for me can be as simply as, oh, very nice. It can be that subtle. It can be very, very subtle. Obviously, in ISKCON, we do have an Indian tradition where you do, placation, what's it called? Dandavat pranam, full all the way down, or at least all the way down on both knees. You've probably seen in the movies that, the ancient Western traditions, they would typically go down on one knee in military circumstances. A lot of times us Westerners don't even go down on both knees. We just go down on one knee. But that doesn't matter. Guys, you have to understand how it manifests physically is just mundane. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you're doing in your heart, in your consciousness. Are you actually submitting? Are you actually inquiring sincerely? Are you submissive? Are you actually submissive inside? Or are you submissive on the outside and not on the inside? Or are you submissive on the inside and not on the outside? Because actually you'd need both. So if you follow my advice and you are able to submit from the heart to a bona fide teacher or master, but then they give you an assignment and you don't do the assignment, what's going to happen, guys? How long are they going to give you mercy if you just continue to not show up, to not follow the assignment, to not follow the instructions? This will not go on forever. Eventually, they will cut you loose. They will rescind the mercy. This will happen. For this to be perfect, it must be submission and inquiry and karma. There must be action based on the submission and inquiry. Even though it's spiritual and it's subtle and whatever, you still have to do things. Whether it's japa or mangalarati or whatever, there's still things you have to actually do. So, just finish up that brewing story. So, my first time meeting Anne there, my brewmaster, I took out my notepad and I just took notes. We talked for 2 hours standing in that store. Occasionally, some other customer would come in and I'd say, yeah, please, take care of him. And a quick note on that. Most of our customers are big lumberjack, big bearded men. And, they hate talking to you. Well, you're a woman. What are you doing here? Yeah, I know what I want. Okay, I don't need your advice, honey. I need 5 pounds of malt, 5 pounds of this, 2 pounds off. Listen, I know exactly what I need. Ring it up for me. I'll get out of your hair. Okay. So, that's false prestige. Their beer is probably not that good. To be honest, it's probably not that good. But, because they're more concerned with their ego than the actual beer. When you're actually concerned with making something nice, spiritual or mundane, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's actually the work and the product, which is more important than your ego, then your behavior will respond accordingly. And you will act as if you have a submissive and inquisitive attitude, which you will have if you're dealing with a top level master who can impart knowledge that you can receive. There's very little other else you can do to actually receive that knowledge. And so, yeah, I talked with Anne for 2 hours and I just did exactly what she said. I never Googled it. From that point on, I never Googled how to brew this, how to ferment, how to distill. I went to the store and I taught and I asked Anne. That's it. I just asked my master and I did what she said. That's all I did. And I had, so now I should tell you about the success I had, because I had success with judo, right? Where, I was demonstrating in front of the class, in front of black belts, myself being only a white or yellow belt at the time. So with beer, just jumping to I mean, well, I shouldn't jump past the most juicy part that the other men want to hear, is that there were many beautiful women who tried my beer and would gasp. They would just like lose their panties like right away. I never acted on that actually, but it's nice to see. It's nice to hear their voice and to see them have a big experience with your work. That's always nice. But really, the best thing was when I went to a homebrew competition, and because I am who I am and I focus more on my work than the appearance of that work, I had probably the least pleasant table that was set up. Everyone else had labels and big signs and posters. I had a little like pastel painting, Campy's Brew, which, I mean, it sucked. I mean, I had no labels on even the bottles. There was no branding at all. It was just beer. It was just beer and someone who loved beer. And but one guy came and he tried one of my beers, which was a honey basil beer, and honey basil pale ale, I think. And he tried it. As soon as he took the first sip, I knew I got him. He looked at me right away, and it kind of hurt. It's that look where it hurts so good that he didn't want to admit it was that good, because guess what? He's a brewmaster. He's the second in command at Switchback Brewery, which has the biggest fermentation tanks in the world. Definitely in the country, but I think they're actually the biggest fermentation tanks in the entire world, because they only have one recipe. So they don't need many different small little tanks. They just need one huge thing, which eventually will cuts down cost over time. It's definitely the biggest in the country. It might be the biggest in the world too, I think. So, but yeah, I mean, this judo is different from liquid. Beer and wine is a liquid. So, I mean, the only success I can show is stories like that of people that said, wow, that's really good. And then there's also external validation. You can win a ribbon at this and that. But, I just didn't, most of the beer I made, I drank. And I drank with my friends. So I just I never had a chance to have that much external, official external validation. So there are two stories of two bona fide teachers I met who, by following the principles in this verse, 434 in the Gita, I attained otherworldly success. To be quite honest, it's miraculous, because I've met other people in the same field who've been slaving at this for years and decades, and they just haven't made it to the point that I have made it. And it's not just that I made it, it's that I didn't work that hard. I really did not work that hard, because I had grace on my side. I had mercy. I had virtue. So that's my first master was Aristotle, who, taught explicitly the same things we're learning about here in the Bhagavad Gita. He teaches a lot, and I've been practicing that since 16 years old. So I've been primed since a young age to be good at being a student and a disciple. And that's exactly what I claim to be. All right, I'll cut it short before we hit the 1 hour mark. Hari Bol, Hare Krishna. Peace on earth, and God bless you all.